Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Brian Donnelly. The Spirits Educator is a digital education platform and trade resource for the distilled spirits industry. My aim is to provide in-depth spirits information, brand transparency, and category education for distributor sales teams, service industry and hospitality members, and motivated enthusiasts. I currently work for a major wine and spirits distributor, but my work here on the Spirits Educator is completely unaffiliated with my current employer. Today I'm going to be talking about port, cask-finished bourbon, and rye, and I'm going to have 10 recommendations that you can actually find in your local liquor store, so these will not be allocated. I'm going to be referencing a script that I wrote so I can communicate all this information correctly. If you'd like to read my full write-up on this topic, I'll leave a link below in the description. Before I get into my recommendations, I think it's important to talk about the products that will not be on this list. I want to highlight products that are actually available, and I want to minimize talking about products that are highly allocated. So I'm sorry, Sazerac, but I'm not going to be talking about the Isaac Bowman port cask. I'm not going to be talking about the 1792 port cask, and I'm definitely not going to be talking about the Thomas More port cask. The reason I start out with these is Sazerac, the parent company for these three products, they have these three port cask whiskeys. The Isaac Bowman, even though I found it in a few liquor stores, I've been told that this product is pretty allocated and it's not readily available, so I'm not going to be talking about the Isaac Bowman. 1792, I believe Sazerac still makes this product because it's listed on the 1792 website, but ever since the Thomas More became available, I haven't seen any 1792 port cask finish in my market. Now, I'm speaking for Oklahoma specifically. Maybe it's more readily available in larger markets. And the reason I'm not going to be talking about the Thomas More line, so the Thomas More line, I believe is distilled at the 1792 distillery. You might think of it as a lower tier label to 1792, and it's just terrible. I mean, I've had all three. There's a Chardonnay cask finish, there's a port cask finish, and a Cabernet cask finish. I don't use the term undrinkable often, but the Chardonnay cask finish truly is undrinkable. The port's okay, and the cab's okay. When you start considering, how many incredible options there are, even at this price point, I would just completely avoid the Thomas More brand altogether. It may look interesting because of the 1792 connection or because it's, owned by Sazerac. While the Thomas More port cask finish is the best option of the three, it's still not worth the money. And I would buy any of the 10 products that I'm about to recommend before I bought a single bottle of Thomas More. A couple other products I'm not going to be talking about today is the Basil Hayden Dark Rye, because that includes some Canadian whiskey. And I'm trying to keep this list focused on American whiskey. And the final two products I'm not going to be talking about today are the Chattanooga port cask and the Smooth Ambler port cask. I'm a huge fan of both the Smooth Ambler brand and the Chattanooga brand. The reason I'm not going to be talking about these brands today is I believe they were true LTOs. Again, I'm speaking for the Oklahoma market. The Smooth Ambler port cask finish never came to the Oklahoma market. I believe it was a true one and done LTO. If that's not the case, please correct me in the comments. Maybe it's available in the bigger markets. Again, I'm a huge Smooth Ambler fan. I like almost everything this brand does. I've not gotten a chance to try the Smooth Ambler port cask finish because it's not been available in my local market of Oklahoma, so I'm not going to talk about it. The other product I'm not going to talk about is the Chattanooga port cask finish. I'm a huge fan of the Chattanooga brand. The Chattanooga port cask finish did come to the Oklahoma market, but it was a true one and done LTO or limited time offering. So I'm really trying to focus on port cask finish American whiskey that is actually available. And so because this was a true one and done LTO, maybe it's still lingering around in your market. Maybe you saw it, maybe you own a bottle. I'm just not going to be talking about it today. This list is not going to be a ranking. So I'm going to talk about these 10 products in order of most affordable to most expensive. This is not going to be a ranking, and I'm not going to be tasting each of these products. I was not able to get my hands on all 10 products in time for this video, so I just am opting to not do a tasting component for this video. And maybe in the future I'll taste through, maybe all 10, maybe just a couple. Again, I'm a huge fan of port cask finish American whiskey. But for the sake of this video, because I think it's already going to run a little long, I'm not going to do the tasting component because it would take me forever to taste through all 10 of these and explain their differences. Before we actually get into the list, I think it's important to understand what exactly is port wine. Port is a sweet fortified wine hailing from the Douro Valley of Portugal. It originates from the trade wars between England and France in the 17th century, causing England to increase trade with Portugal. The powerful red wines became so popular in England, and brandy started to be added to stabilize the dry wines to make sure they arrived in England in good condition. Ports are made by adding grape spirit to a fermenting juice to create an alcoholic sweet wine. This is a technique that has been used in this region since the 18th century, and is now used to make wines of a similar style throughout the world. Port is made in red, white, and rosé styles, but red port is the most common. And the two most basic styles of port are ruby ports and tawny ports. All right, basic ruby ports are a blend of wines that are typically between 1 and 3 years old. They lack the concentration, complexity, and tannins of a more premium style of port. Basic tawny ports are no older than basic ruby ports, but they are made in a more oxidative style. So what does that mean? So tawny ports, as the name suggests, are a little or significantly browner in color than kind of a bright ruby port, and thus the names are important here. Ruby because it's bright red, tawny because it's darker brown. And again, the tawnies are deliberately and intentionally made in a more oxidative style, whereas ruby ports are intentionally made in a more protective style, meaning they're not exposed to oxygen to preserve their color and freshness, and tawnies are deliberately exposed to oxygen to create a more oxidative style. Now, there are certainly more premium rubies and more premium tawnies, and I'm not going to get, this video is not an in-depth explanation of port wine because, it can be perhaps a longer, more complicated topic. When it comes to the port wine barrels that American whiskey producers are aging their cask-finished product in, a lot of time it will specifically say ruby port or tawny port, and sometimes it will just say dark port. Sometimes it won't say anything at all, just say port wine, and usually that's an indicator of quality, how much detail the producer gives you and how transparent they're willing to be. That's normally an indication of quality because they're obviously good. If they're spending more money on premium tawny barrels, they're going to want to tell you about that because that is going to be reflected in the final retail price of their cask-finished bourbon or their cask-finished rye. So I thought it was important to address what exactly are port wines. And, if you see the terms ruby port or tawny port, you now have a kind of very basic explanation of what those are and why it might affect the final product. Personally, I'm a huge fan of port wines. I know higher alcohol, sweeter dessert wines are slightly falling out of favor, but I'm a huge fan of port wines. They're absolutely delicious. I love tawny port, even though ruby port can be really fun for cocktails. But I love an age statement tawny port. If you're interested in exploring port wines, I highly recommend you go buy a 10-year age statement tawny port from one of the major port houses. They're absolutely delicious. If you refrigerate the bottle after opening, it will stay good for up to 6 weeks. I know a lot of people think that because port is a fortified wine, that it can, stay open sitting on your back bar or on your kitchen counter forever and ever and ever. Port is still a wine. It still can be affected by, oxygen, so it will eventually go bad. So in order to protect the wine and, if you're not going to drink it quickly, because it is a high alcohol wine, I highly recommend putting it in your fridge. And then if you don't like cold wine, let it come back to room temperature before you consume it. But keeping it in the fridge under that colder temperature will help protect it from oxygen and extend the amount of time that bottle stays good. All right, enough about port wines and more about port cask-finish American whiskey. So the first product on my list is the Ezra Brooks 99 Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey finished in port wine casks. The Ezra Brooks brand is produced at Lux Row Distillers, a 90-acre distillery property in Bardstown, Kentucky, about an hour south of Louisville by car. The distillery also produces and bottles the following bourbon brands: Rebel, David, Nichols, Davis County, and Blood Oath. The Ezra Brooks brand was created in 1957 by Frank Silverman and bottled at Hoffman Distilling Company in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky. In 1976, the Medley Distilling Company in Owensboro, Kentucky produced Ezra Brooks, where it becomes their best-selling brand. In 1993, the St. Louis-based spirit supplier Luxco purchased the Ezra Brooks brand. Luxco was previously known as the David Sherman Corporation. Between 2016 and 2017, the brand updated their packaging and released the Bourbon Cream and Rye labels. In 2016, Luxro Distillers opened, and Ezra Brooks, along with several other Luxco bourbons, finally have a production home. In 2021, the Ezra Brooks brand released the 99 proof, which becomes the new standard bottling proof for the bourbon and rye, so the Ezra Brooks 80 proof is officially discontinued. Ezra Brooks 99 Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey, sometimes written as KSBW, is the brand's flagship product and the base whiskey for their port cask-finished release. The bourbon is distilled from a mash bill of 78% corn, 10% rye, and 12% malted barley, and aged for 4 years in new charred American oak barrels, charcoal filtered and bottled at 99 proof or 49.5% ABV. Charcoal filtering is legally mandated for Tennessee whiskey, but extremely uncommon for Kentucky bourbon. This step gives Ezra Brooks a unique, mellow flavor. The port cask finish is the brand's newest release. In November 2024, this product is readily available, although I'm not sure if it is a permanent line extension. The brand does not disclose how long the Ezra Brooks 99 bourbon is finished in port cask, but the final product is also bottled at 99 proof or 49.5% ABV. And the tasting notes for this product are vanilla, tobacco, and leather, in perfect harmony on the nose, with sweet fruitness and dark chocolate on the palate. Let me check my pricing. So the pricing for this product is somewhere between $26 and $28. And again, that's Oklahoma pricing, so please check your local liquor store for pricing because every market has different pricing. I recently just got back from visiting the Luxro Distillery, and I can highly recommend the tour if you're in the area of Bardstown. It's a beautiful distillery. It's a great, relatively short tour, and I highly recommend it. Second product on this list is Noble Oak Double Oak Rye, rye whiskey finished with port wine staves. Noble Oak is an American whiskey brand with a mission to plant trees. They partnered with OneTreePlanted.org to plant 1.24 million trees to date. You can visit their website for a very detailed map of where exactly their reforestation projects have been completed, and I'll include a link below in the description. American whiskey, particularly bourbon, requires by law a new barrel every time, which could place a huge strain on the long-term sustainability of American oak forests. This is why more American whiskey brands are partnering with organizations that encourage the planting of new trees. Noble Oak is owned by Scottish spirit supplier Educator, who is most well known for the Macallan single malt Scotch whiskey. The Noble Oak Double Oak Rye is distilled in Indiana from a mash bill of 95% rye and 5% malted barley. The whiskey is aged for a minimum of 1 year in new charred American white oak barrels and finished with former ruby port staves sourced from the Douro Valley in Portugal by Stuart McPherson, the master of wood for Macallan. The brand uses a special compression finishing process which applies cycles of heat and pressure to maximize the wood to spirit contact in the barrel. The final product is bottled at 96 proof or 48% ABV and won a double gold at the 2023 San Francisco World Spirits Competition. And the tasting notes for this product are a color of deep mahogany, a nose of toffee, allspice, wood, and rich grains, and a palate of notes of sweet brown sugar, maple syrup dissolved into a sharp profile of green pepper, grass, closing with an austere rye grainy spice. Let me reference my pricing. So the Noble Oak Rye will retail for somewhere between $32 and $38. The third product on our list is the Templeton Midnight Rye, American rye whiskey blended with dark port wine. The Templeton brand was founded in 2006 in the tiny town of Templeton in western Iowa by Keith Kirchhoff, a local farmer and distiller and second-generation descendant of a Templeton Prohibition moonshiner. The town of Templeton has a famous reputation for distilling rye whiskey during American Prohibition. Nicknamed the Good Stuff, their product was so good that it allegedly became the whiskey of choice for the Chicago outfit crime boss Al Capone. Kirchhoff went the legal route when reviving the town's rye whiskey distilling legacy. Originally using contract rye whiskey from Indiana, the brand opened the distillery in Templeton in 2018. The Templeton Midnight Rye is a rye whiskey distilled from a mash bill of 95% rye and 5% malted barley, aged in first fill American oak barrels, which means the barrels have already been used once for aging whiskey, then blended with dark port wine and bottled at 90 proof or 45% ABV. Unlike the other products on this list, the Templeton Midnight Rye is a slightly unconventional whiskey because their base whiskey is blended with actual port wine rather than finishing the wine in barrels that previously held port wine. And the tasting notes for this product are an aroma of an enchanting dance of dark cherries, figs, and a subtle hint of spiced orange peel. The taste is a perfect balance of cinnamon, clove, and a touch of dark chocolate, all harmonizing in a silky, full-bodied texture that coats the palate. And the finish is a lingering embrace of warmth and satisfaction, leaving behind echoes of dry fruits, oak, and a whisper of black pepper. Boy, they really went all out on those tasting notes. Let me check my pricing. Templeton Midnight Rye should retail somewhere between $38 and $42. All right, product number 4 is the Woodinville Straight Bourbon Whiskey finished in port casks. The Woodinville brand was founded by two best friends, Orlin Sorensen and Brett Carlisle, I hope I'm saying that correctly, in 2010 in Woodinville, Washington, which is about 30 minutes northeast of Seattle by car. They received help and mentorship from the late David Pickerell, former master distiller of Maker's Mark and Whistle Pig. Dave, who died on November 1st, 2018, is considered the Johnny Appleseed of American craft distilling because he provided his vast knowledge and experience to assist so many new distilleries to get off the ground. Another example of a distillery Dave worked with is Garrison Brothers in Hyde, Texas. We'll touch on one of Garrison Brothers' products later in this list. Woodinville focuses on 3 areas to ensure their whiskey is as high quality as possible. First, all their grains are estate grown and sourced from the Omlin family farm in Quincy, Washington. Second, they use a single batch distillation in a pear-shaped pot still. Third, before the wood is turned into a barrel, it is seasoned outside in the open, exposed to the full elements of air, rain, wind, sun, snow for 18 months to soften the wood's harsh tannins. After seasoning, they toast the inside of the barrel for added complexity before finally heavily charring the barrel's inside to enrich the wood's desirable flavors. The port Cask-Finished label was released in 2017. The base whiskey for this product is the brand's flagship Woodinville Straight Bourbon Whiskey. The bourbon is mashed and distilled at the Woodinville Distillery from a mash bill of 72% corn, 22% rye, and 6% malted barley, and aged for 5 years in those pre-seasoned, toasted and charred American oak barrels. Next, the fully mature bourbon is moved to former port casks sourced from the Douro Valley in Portugal, and further aged for 6 to 9 months before being bottled at 90 proof or 45% ABV. The port introduces a rich texture and notes of sticky baked plums, chocolate-covered cherries, creating a complex and delectable bourbon you can really chew on. And I'm going to read the tasting notes for this product. The nose is vanilla and sweet berries. The taste is caramel, berries, and dark chocolate, and the finish is lingering fruit. And the pricing for the Woodinville is around $43, maybe $44. Number 5 on my list is the Amador Whiskey Kentucky Rye Whiskey finished in port barrels. Amador Whiskey Company is owned by California wine supplier Trinchero Family Estates and named for Amador County, located just east of Sacramento. All their whiskeys are double barrel aged, sourcing Kentucky distilled whiskey and finishing it in California wine casks. The Amador Port Finished Rye is distilled at the Willett Distillery in Bardstown, Kentucky from a mash bill of 74% rye, 11% corn, and 15% malted barley. The whiskey is aged for 3 years in new charred American oak barrels at the Castle and Key Distillery in Frankfort, Kentucky. Finally, the rye whiskey is finished for 9 to 12 months in former medium toast French and American oak casks that formerly held Amador County Terra de Oro port, then bottled at 92 proof or 46% ABV. One note I want to add here. So the TDO or Terra de Oro port is a California port, I believe, an American port, meaning it does not come from Portugal, although this product is made in a port style. In researching this, I read that Trinchero recently closed the Terra de Oro winery in Amador County at the end of August in 2024. I'm not sure how this will affect where they source their American port barrels moving forward. And the tasting notes for this product are deep copper brown color with red hue from port wine barrels, classic rye spices with aromas and flavors of gingerbread, cookie dough, toffee, and hints of vanilla and honey, full-bodied and decadent. Let me check my pricing. The Amador should retail for somewhere between Call it $50 and $54. The number 6 product on my list is the Breckenridge Whiskey Port Cask-Finish. The Breckenridge Distillery is the world's highest distillery, located in the popular ski town of Breckenridge, Colorado at 9,600 feet above sea level. Founded in 2008 by Brian Nolt, a doctor in radiology turned distiller who made a major career transition after experiencing an epiphany while visiting Scotch distilleries in Scotland. The Breckenridge Port Cask-Finish begins as their flagship high rye bourbon distilled at the Breckenridge Distillery from a mash bill of 56% corn, 38% rye, and 6% malted barley. The base bourbon is a blend of 3 to 8-year-old bourbon made using high mineral content Rocky Mountain water sourced from tarns, which are alpine lakes carved out by glaciers. Next, the mature bourbon is finished for 8 months in 10 to 20-year-old 59-gallon tawny port wine casks. The final product is non-chill filtered, bottled in 8 to 10-barrel batches at 90 proof or 45% ABV. The Breckenridge Port Cask-Finish won a gold medal in 2023 at the San Francisco World Spirits Competition. The retail pricing for the Breckenridge is somewhere between, let's call it $51 and $55. Number 7 on this list should be no surprise to anyone, and that's the Angel's Envy Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey finished in port wine barrels. When people think about port cask-finished bourbon, they think about Angel's Envy. Unlike most other brands that release a port cask-finished bourbon as a special release, limited time offer, or line extension, Angel's Envy built their entire brand with their port cask-finished bourbon. Founder and former master distiller Lincoln Henderson created the brand with his son, Wes. Lincoln retired from Brown-Forman after a long and successful career, where he played an integral role in the creation of the Woodford Reserve brand and other successful Brown-Forman products like Gentleman Jack and Jack Daniel's Single Barrel. He was also introduced into the Bourbon Hall of Fame. Inspired by the boom in craft distilling, Wes encouraged his retired father to experiment with something new without the constraints of working for a large company. They decided they wanted to finish their new bourbon in port barrels at a time when very few American whiskey producers were doing this. When you age whiskey in a barrel, a certain amount of volume evaporates over time. This is known as the Angel's share. In Kentucky, I've heard people cite that it's about 5%. Well, the story goes, when Lincoln and Wes tasted their first batch of experimental whiskey, Lincoln joked that maybe they had gotten the better deal and the Angels should be envious of them. And the legend and name of Angel's Envy was born. Lincoln Henderson died in 2013 and Bacardi bought the brand in 2015. The Angel's Envy Distillery is located in downtown Louisville across from the Louisville Sluggers Field, home to the minor league baseball team, the Louisville Bats. The brand does not provide a lot of transparency regarding their production process. We do know that Angel's Envy sources their barrels from their Louisville neighbor, Kelvin Cooperage. They finish their Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey in ruby port casks for an undisclosed period of time, then bottle the final product at 86.6 proof or 43.3% ABV. Alright, the tasting notes for Angel's Envy are a nose of subtle vanilla, raisins, maple syrup, and toasted nuts. The palate is vanilla, ripe fruit, maple syrup, toast, and bitter chocolate. And the finish is clean and lingering sweetness with a hint of Madeira that slowly fades. And Madeira is a different type of fortified wine, not to be confused with port, that comes from the island of Madeira, which is a Portuguese island off the coast of Africa. And it's very interesting that they're using a different fortified wine to describe the finish of a bourbon finished with another type of fortified wine. All right, let me check my pricing. Angel's Envy should retail for around $49.99 or around $50. The number 8 product on my list is the TX Texas Straight Bourbon Whiskey finished in tawny port casks. The TX Bourbon Port Cask Finish is the second port cask finished Texas bourbon on this list, along with the Garrison Brothers Guadalupe, which I'll talk about at the end. The company was founded by Leonard Firestone and Troy Robertson in 2017. Unlike the Garrison Brothers Distillery, which is located near the Texas Hill Country, the Firestone and Robertson Distillery is located in Fort Worth in North Texas. Their TX Whiskey Ranch is 112 acres, truly a Texas-sized property, and they claim to be the largest distillery west of the Mississippi River. Their Texas Straight Bourbon Whiskey is a wheated bourbon distilled from yellow dent corn, soft red winter wheat, and barley, all grown by a fourth-generation Texas farmer about an hour south of the distillery. The brand does not disclose the exact percentage breakdown of their mash bill. They ferment their mash with a proprietary strain of yeast captured from a Texas pecan. This is important because the brand's mash bill plus the yeast strain is known as their recipe. Texas-sourced water is also used for all parts of production. The whiskey is aged for a minimum of 4 years in North Texas. The brand emphasizes the bourbon is made with Texas ingredients for an undeniable Texas flavor. TX was purchased by French spirits giant Pernod Ricard in 2019. Pernod Ricard is the parent company of large brands such as Jameson, Absolut, and Malibu. They also have a portfolio of American whiskeys with Jefferson, Rabbit Hole, Smooth Ambler, and now TX. TX launched their barrel finish series in 2021. The port cask finish uses their base Texas straight bourbon whiskey, finishes it in tawny port cask for an undisclosed period of time. This product is non-chill filtered and bottled at 101.6 proof or 50.8% ABV. The tasting notes for this product are: the nose is toasted caramel, baked apple, sweet smoke, honey, and cinnamon. The palate is chocolate, baking spices, apricot, and maple syrup. And the finish is a long finish, warm, heavy dark fruit and molasses. Let me check my pricing. The TX should retail for around $61, $62. So call it low 60s. The number 9 product on this list is the Old Elk Straight Bourbon Whiskey, port cask finished. Old Elk is a bourbon brand from Fort Collins, Colorado. Old Elk is one of the brands on this list that I do not know much about because I've never sold their brand professionally, so I will need to rely on the information they release publicly. It appears one major production difference that sets them apart is their slow cut proofing process. Here's what their website says. One of the things that sets Old Elk apart from the herd is our slow cut proofing process, and that slow cut is trademarked. For us, it means extra steps and extra costs. For you, it means the world-class quality you've come to expect from our products. Still reading from the website. To proof alcohol, water is added until the liquid reaches a desired strength. However, this creates a heat-liberating reaction, and when you add hundreds of gallons of water in a day or two, it ends up boiling off many of the lighter, finer flavors. Here at Old Elk, though we've always done things differently, instead of a day, we spend weeks adding small increments of water to keep our liquid cool and save the delicate flavors our team works so hard producing during mashing, fermentation, distillation, and maturation. It's why we've deemed our whiskey slow cut, and that's trademarked. And it's why you can taste the quality in every sip. The Old Elk Bourbon Port Cask Finished is distilled from their signature high malt mash bill of 51% corn, 15% rye, and 34% malted barley. The whiskey is aged for a minimum of 5 years in new American charred barrels, then cask finished in 59-gallon former port cask from Portugal for between 10 months and 1 year. Then finally bottled at 108.1 proof or 54.05% ABV. The tasting notes for this product are honey, orchard, apples, oak, and a flavor profile featuring smoke on the finish. It's fascinating to see certain brands choose to put a lot of detail and care and kind of artistic finesse into the way they write their tasting notes. And some brands just bam, 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 they just give it to you really straightforward. Okay, let me check my pricing. The Old Elk should retail for somewhere between, call it $93 and $100. And number 10 on this list is the Garrison Brothers Guadalupe Texas Straight Bourbon Whiskey finished in port casks. This is a brand I know a lot about. I've gotten to meet the founder, Dan Garrison, on multiple occasions. I've gotten to work the local market with Donis Todd, their master distiller. I'm a big fan of the brand. You know, it's certainly an expensive brand, and they do things a little differently that gives the product a really unique flavor profile. Based off the flavor profile and the price, the Garrison Brother portfolio is really polarizing. People either love it or people absolutely hate it. If you can't afford Garrison Brothers, I highly recommend you try it because the flavor profile truly is something unique. Garrison Brothers was the first legal distiller in the state of Texas following Prohibition. They have distilled all their own bourbon since they opened and only produce one brand, both of which are a rarity these days. Their distillery is located in Hye, Texas, about an hour west of Austin by car, and that's Hye, H-Y-E. Their flagship small batch bourbon is their base whiskey for all their cask finished products. The small batch bourbon is a wheated bourbon distilled from a mash bill of 74% corn, 15% red winter wheat, and 11% malted barley, fermented using a sweet mash instead of a sour mash, and aged for a minimum of 4 years and toasted and charred in New American white oak barrels. If you're unsure what sweet versus sour mash means, so most brands, the default is a sour mash. That is where they take the acidic residue from the bottom of the still following distillation and add it back to the next fermenting batch. That acidic mash helps, keep the pH in balance and jumpstart the fermentation and helps a consistent fermentation time and time again. A sweet mash is just the process of fermenting your mash without adding sour mash. So you're not adding sugar or anything, to make it quote unquote sweet. You're just simply not using a sour mash, which makes your mashing process a sweet mash. And I'm sure other brands do it. Garrison Brothers is one of the few brands that jumps to mind that, really stands by their sweet mash process. The idea for Guadalupe came from a previous wine cask finishing project called Educator. In 2016, Garrison Brothers collaborated with Texas winemaker Llano Estacadado in the Panhandle. Llano Estacadado is one of Texas's oldest winemakers. They traded them 20 wet Garrison Brothers bourbon barrels in exchange for 20 10-year-old Texas port-style casks. Llano Estacadado aged a Cabernet Sauvignon wine in the Garrison Brothers bourbon barrels, and they aged 4-year-old bourbon in their port casks. The result was Estacadado port cask finished Texas straight bourbon whiskey bottled at 107 proof or 53.5% ABV. Founder Dan Garrison said, "We took what we learned from the Estacadado and improved it with the Guadalupe." The Guadalupe label can be identified from the other Garrison Brothers products by the burnt orange wax top. For the Guadalupe label, they cask finished their 4-year-old wheated bourbon for 2 additional years in super wet tawny port casks from Portugal. Then they bottle the final product at 107 proof or 53.5% ABV. A wet barrel or wet cask is when the original winery or barrel broker ships the used barrels with a small portion of wine still inside the barrel to keep the wooden staves moist and prevent them from cracking or leaking. A wet, well-seasoned barrel will provide a lot of flavor to the next whiskey that is added. Garrison Brothers chooses to finish their Guadalupe for 2 years, which is a long time for finishing a bourbon. As you probably have seen from this list, most cask-finished bourbons are usually less than a year, maybe 6 to 9 months. All this care and attention to detail is certainly reflected in the final price. In my home market of Oklahoma, when it's available, this product costs somewhere between $132 and $144 per bottle. The distillery location has huge temperature swings between the Texas summers and winters. There is a huge evaporation loss, also referred to as the angel's share, which gives Garrison Brothers a big, bold, and concentrated flavor profile. It is this unique taste that actually makes it a perfect match for finishing in port casks. To quote their website, port wine is typically richer, sweeter, heavier, and higher in alcohol content. Most would say the same thing about Garrison Brothers bourbon. To give an example of how the angel's share affects the final product for Guadalupe, master distiller Donis Todd selected 122 30-gallon bourbon barrels that had been originally filled in 2016. The angel's share losses were about 13 gallons per barrel, meaning that there was just 2,065 gallons of bourbon to be used. Then, this liquid was entered into 35 59-gallon port casks in 2020. The brand considers this arguably the best bourbon vintage they have ever made. The tasting notes for this product are a sensacious, creamy liquid, full-on berry fruit, ripe plums, strawberry butter on flaky morning biscuits. That's a new one. Chocolate and cinnamon, lavender honey, toasted coffee beans, instant drool. All right, everyone, that's it. Those are 10 port cask finish American whiskeys, so bourbons and a couple ryes from many different states at 10 different price points. And all these products should be more or less non-allocated, so you should be able to find the majority, if not all, these products every single day right now in your local liquor store. Again, check your local liquor store for pricing. Every single market's different, so I was quoting Oklahoma pricing because that's relevant for me. I live here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. But if you have any questions, please leave me a comment below or shoot me an email. You can find my email on my website, which I'll link below. And again, I love regular bourbon, but when done well, port cask-finished bourbon, it's really fun. It's really tasty. Some are done better than others. Some are more expensive than others, depending on their production process. I thought it'd be really fun to go through this list and kind of, flush out how each of these products are different. And maybe in a future video, I'll try to get samples of all 10 and I'll taste through them. That might be a really, really long video, so maybe I'll have to break that up into kind of 5 and 5. And one of my favorite things to do that I'm going to start doing more of is tasting through the products, here on camera, and then comparing how I think they taste with the tasting notes that are provided to me by the brand. Thank you so much again for watching. I hope you found this video enjoyable and informative. And if you could, please give it a like and consider subscribing to the channel. If you'd like to be notified whenever I have new content on my website or this YouTube channel, please consider subscribing to my email newsletter. I'll leave a link below in the description. If you'd like to support this channel further, please consider becoming a Patreon member or gift me a cocktail through the link below in the description. And as always, please drink responsibly.